Good evening, everyone. Hi, I'm Senator Liz Krueger, and welcome to my webinar on the impact of casinos on urban communities. I am thrilled to be co-hosting this with some of my very important local elected officials, and many of whom are here with us tonight. And we'll have a few minutes to speak as soon as I get through some of the basics. So I want to welcome everyone who's here, who's viewing either on Zoom or Facebook. I want to thank co-sponsors of tonight's event, Senators Kristen Gonzalez, Brad Hoylman-Sigal, Assemblymember Harvey Epstein, Assemblymember Alex Borras, Tony Simone, and Linda Rosenthal. As always on my webinars, we have closed captioning available for this evening's event. Please know you must activate closed captioning to view the text on your device. If you've never done this, if you're on Zoom, click on live transcript in the meeting controls to start viewing closed captioning. And if you're on the Facebook Live system, you will see a CC button on the right-hand corner of your video. Click CC for closed caption activation. This forum is being recorded, so everyone who RSVP'd will receive an email with links to the event video, and all of the resources we'll be posting during the event that are posted in the chat within a few days, along with our presenters' PowerPoints. So don't think you have to scribble everything down, even if you find something very, very interesting. Now moving to our event. Up to 3 casinos could open in New York City in the coming years, and 5 casino proposals are being discussed within Manhattan. Those sites include the Hudson Yards, Times Square, Saks on Fifth Avenue, Midtown West, 41st and 11th, and Midtown East, the East River between 37th and 41st off the FDR. There is an article briefly outlining these locations in the New York Times article posted in the chat. Tonight, we're going to hear from multiple experts about the casino process, the casino siting process in New York City, the fiscal and economic impacts of gaming institutions, and their impacts on individuals, businesses, and the surrounding communities. I have been very clear for many years. I oppose casinos and gambling in general. I find it to be a tax on desperation with no societal benefit and real prices to be paid. And as they often say, only the house wins. So I'm clear on where I am, but I really believe it's important to bring experts in to talk about some of these details, because we know all 5 sites are lobbying very hard to convince us of just the opposite of my opinion. First, we'll hear brief remarks from our co-sponsors, and they will introduce each other one after the other. So we're going to start with Senator Kristen Gonzalez.
Thank you so much, Senator Krueger. It's so good to be here. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining. My name is Kristen Gonzalez, and I'm the state senator for District 59, which covers the east side of Manhattan and parts of northern Brooklyn and western Queens. And in my district, we have one of these casino proposals by the UN. And a few months ago, our office held, or last month actually, feels like longer, we held a town hall where we discussed with the developers what the community needs and what this proposal is. And while, in this presentation, we heard about some of the things that this community has been fighting for years, like good union jobs and green space and affordable housing, what we heard from the community was even clearer that the public goods we deserve to live really high quality lives in this part of Manhattan shouldn't be dependent on the development of a casino. And so tonight, and similar to the town hall that we hosted then, what we really want to do is center all of your concerns, because so often the vision for our communities is driven by developers, driven by corporations, driven by people who aren't everyday New Yorkers like us. So I'm really excited to take all of the information from tonight, hear the concerns about the impact of a casino in Manhattan and really translate that to action. So that looks like engaging our neighbors to talk about some of these concerns as well. And we're here as an office to be a partner in that fight. We're here to spread the right information and the factual information about how what this process looks like from here to, when the applications are submitted. And I just want to thank again Senator Krueger and all the co-sponsors tonight for creating this really important space so that we can have a positive community vision for what we need and deserve. And with that, I'm going to introduce the next speaker, which is our incredible colleague, Senator Brad Hoylman.
Thank you, Senator Gonzalez. Thank you, Senator Krueger. I want to thank both of you and all of our co-sponsors and the experts here tonight. We're going to hear a lot about the pros and cons of casinos. Some of the pros, clearly, there are good paying union jobs that are stable. They could bring tax revenue for the city and state, for our public schools. But we know that casinos also pose the risks that were discussed around social costs that our communities will have to bear. And we should go into this discussion and this debate with our eyes wide open. And that's why this forum is so important to help frame the discussion as we move forward. Through this process, we do need to center the community and ensure that community members have the opportunity to have their voices heard. I'm going to be using my involvement with the Community Advisory Committee, which you will learn soon, to do just that. Ensure that the proposals, and there are two of them in my district on the west side of Manhattan, are first and foremost beneficial to and desired by the community around it. I'm going to be working closely with constituents, my local community boards, my colleagues here on the Zoom and elsewhere to make sure we get to the right decision. Thank you so much, Senator Krueger, and it's my honor to introduce my fellow West Side elected official, Assemblymember Linda Rosenthal.
Thank you so much, Senator Hoylman-Sigal, and thank you to Senator Krueger for pulling all of us together, as well as the hundreds of people who are watching this and eager to get information. I'm Assemblymember Linda Rosenthal. I represent the Upper West Side and parts of Hell's Kitchen. And I think it's wonderful that tonight we can actually sort myth from fact, because we're going to hear from the experts. So I'm currently the chair of the Assembly Housing Committee, but some years before I was chair of the Committee on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse, which also included gambling, because gambling is an addiction. Gambling is a disease, but it doesn't get the same level of public recognition or level of attention as other addictions may receive. However, we must be mindful of this when discussing the placement of casinos. With the legalization of online sports betting, most New Yorkers are a click or a swipe away from having access to virtual casinos. And as a state, we're seeing the ramifications. OASIS, the state agency that deals with alcoholism and substance use, has increased spending on problem gambling by 2/3 since 2020. And I've seen the real life impact that gambling has on everyday New Yorkers. Over the years, I've talked with people who've gambled their homes away, lost their jobs, their families, racked up thousands of dollars in debt. So I'm deeply concerned by the potential impact that these casinos could have on our communities. Nothing is a done deal, and that's why we're all here tonight. And as we engage in these discussions, it's important we hear from the experts, truly understand the possible ramifications of having casinos in residential areas, listen to the communities, and see how we can all work together to ensure that every community is being heard during this process. So thank you so much. Thank you. And back to you, Senator Krueger.
Oh, thank you. And we've been joined by Assemblymember Harvey Epstein. So thank you, Harvey, for being with us. And I'm going to pass it to you.
Thank you, Senator Krueger, and thank you for hosting this. And I'm, happy to join you in co-sponsoring this event. And I really appreciate your leadership here, as well as Senator Gonzalez and Hoylman-Sigal, as well as my Assembly colleague Linda Rosenthal, around how the important conversation we need to have in our communities about the impact of a casino opening up. Obviously there's one potential location in my district, and it's really important to get really important information and feedback from people who live in the community and have real concerns about it. So I as well am looking forward to hearing from the panelists, with honest concerns about what we've been hearing about the impact that casino has, and something that's impacted in my life as well, and seeing addictions and gambling addictions and how they impact people and families. But at the same time, really trying to get as much information as possible as we move forward. And luckily, one of the panelists is someone who I went to college with a long time ago. So I'm looking forward to hearing from him and all the work that he's doing now. So I'll just hand it back to you, Senator Krueger, unless some member Boris is with us. I don't see Alex on the Zoom though.
No, Alex could not be with us, and I'm not sure Tony ever made it. So unless he speaks up right now, we're going to keep rolling. We all lead very busy, conflicting lives, so we're always juggling. So with that, I am thrilled to be able to introduce our first speaker on the casino siting process, Vicki Bean. She is a member of the Gaming Facility Location Board, the people who are overseeing the siting of casinos, and is the Judge Edward Weinfeld Professor of Law at NYU School of Law, an affiliated professor of public policy of NYU's Robert F. Wagner Graduate School of Public Service. And many of us might know Vicki for when she was a deputy mayor for the city of New York. So I'm very glad that she is with us and is going to present the facts about the siting process, what the siting timeline is, and who is involved with that process. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Vicki Bean.
Thank you so much, Senator Krueger, and thank you for everyone for sponsoring this event. And thank you for everyone who's on Facebook or on the internet and for your interest in this. This is obviously an incredibly important issue for the city, for the state, for the downstate region. And the more everyone can know about exactly what the process is and how you can participate in that process, the better we will be. So I'm going to just share my screen and talk you through what exactly the siting process is all about. Okay, so New York State's Constitution authorizes the state to have up to 7 commercial casinos. And 4 of those were awarded around the 2014 to 2015 period in the upstate area, the Finger Lakes, Capital Region, Catskills, and the Southern Tier. And in the 2022 New York State budget, the legislature passed legislation that established criteria authorizing the grant of up to the remaining 3 licenses, right? And specified a process that should be used in selecting the licensees. So some of those processes are similar to what the state followed in 2014 and 2015. The process is managed by an independent gaming facilities location board. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. The statute sets forth in considerable detail the evaluation criteria. I'll go through those with you. The process is competitive. It's based upon the board's evaluation of different proposals and how well they meet the specified criteria. The casino has to bring very real benefits to the host community or it won't be approved. And there is a fiscal benefit from the casino, from the grant of the license to New York's public schools, its local governments, and treatment services for people who are have problems with gambling. So the differences in the siting process are several, and they were really designed to increase and ensure the community's participation. So before the board sees any application, before we evaluate any application, there is a separate appointed community advisory committee, and that community advisory committee has to approve a project. It doesn't go to the siting board until it's been approved by the Community Advisory Committee. In addition to that, all necessary zoning approval and land use approval processes have to be completed, and the applicant has to have received all of the entitlements, all of the licenses and permits that the application requires. So only projects that are embraced by the community, as reflected by a 2/3 vote of the Community Advisory Committee, and as reflected by a grant of all necessary land use approvals and permits. Only those will even be considered for a license. The selection process is intended, the legislature tried very hard to make it fair, transparent, and competitive. There is no preconceived favorite, there's no sure bets, there's nothing already in the bag for any application. The board that will select who, if any, of the applicants should get a license is comprised of 5 members appointed by the governor. One is Quinia Abrua, one is myself, Vicky Bean, Carlos Nandan, and Stuart Rabinowitz. Stuart was on the 2014-2015 board, and so brings some continuity from that. And then one more member yet to be named by the governor. The members of the board serve with no compensation. We are just doing this because we care about our communities. Lobbying of the board members is prohibited. We can have no conflicts of interest in any way, shape, or form related to casinos or gambling in general. We are working with and really staffed by the New York State Gaming Commission, which is appointed by the governor as well. And they regulate all legal gambling in New York State, including commercial casinos. So if any casino is licensed through this process, they will then become regulated by the Gaming Commission. And in addition, the Gaming Commission really provides staff and expertise to the licensing board. So the first stage is applications. There was a request for applications issued in the beginning of January of 2023. People who are interested in applying can submit questions to clarify different points about the request for applications, which was very long. The first round, we got about 600 questions. Those were answered in August of 2023. In a second round, we got another 450 questions, and those are currently under review. We will put those out just as soon as we can. Once the board releases answers to those second round questions, then any applications are due 30 days later. So 30 days after we issue the answers to the second round questions, the applications will come in. Once the applications are submitted, they'll be published online so everybody can see exactly what they are. A community advisory committee for each proposal will be formed. The members will receive the application and they'll begin working to review the application and how well it meets the criteria, what it does for the community, any impacts that it might have on the community. Applicants at the same time must continue or begin to navigate the land use and zoning approval process that is also required. The Community Advisory Committee has to follow open meetings laws. They must hold open hearings to gauge local support or opposition. And at the end of that process, at the end of their review, they have to formally vote in an open meeting, and it requires 2/3 of the members to approve the project. If they don't approve the project by a 2/3 vote, the board never will consider that particular application. The community advisory committees within New York City are 6 people. They are appointed by the governor, the mayor, the state senator in whose district the application falls, the state assembly member in whose district it falls, the borough president, and the city council member in the district where it falls. The 3 licenses are available anywhere in the state, but the presumption is that because of the cost of the license, that the applications will be received in the downstate area, New York City, Long Island, Westchester, etc. So outside of New York City, there's a slightly different configuration, but let's focus on New York City here. In terms of the zoning, every proposed project has to complete any required municipal zoning process. The process is determined by the municipality where the project is proposed. The board, the licensing board, may establish a timeline providing a reasonable amount of time that applicants can have to obtain their zoning approval and any land use approvals that they need. The New York City Department of City Planning has proposed a citywide zoning text amendment. They proposed it in November of 2023, and it would allow gaming facilities, any gaming facility licensed by the state, licensed by the board, as a permitted use in certain districts, C4, C5, C6, C7, C8, and M1, M2, and M3. I've given you a portal in which to see the text amendment, and that will be available in the PowerPoint for you. Applicants will also have to acquire any other land use approvals that they need. So if they need to demap parkland, if they need to map a street, if they need approvals for disposition of city property, amendments to the city zoning map, any of those things, they also have to achieve those permits and those approvals. This is a map showing exactly where those districts that I mentioned are. You can see in the red, those are commercial districts within Manhattan. The purple is manufacturing districts within Manhattan. And those are areas where under the citywide proposed text amendment, which is now has been announced and will go into the ULURP process, a casino could be located there if it receives a license from the board. Okay, so that's the city process. The board is required to analyze the revenue impact of every application, and that revenue impact will depend in part on the competitive landscape that each applicant faces. So that may change as a applicant doesn't receive the permission that they need from the city or from the zoning, from the local government, I should say, because it's also Westchester and Long Island. If they don't receive the zoning permission that they need or any land use approvals that they need, or if they don't receive 2/3 of the vote of the Community Advisory Committee, then they drop out. Because their dropping out could affect the competitive landscape that every applicant that still is in the process might face, they will then have to submit some additional materials that will be considered in the process, including their proposed tax rates that they propose to pay, market and revenue studies, and a description and analysis of the competitive environment. The minimum investment that any applicant has to say that they are prepared to make is at least 500 million. That can include some previous capital investments like the purchase of the land. In addition, they would have to pay a minimum of $500 million for the license fee, and they will have to pay taxes of a minimum of 25% of the receipts from slot machines and a minimum of 10% from all other sources like table games. Applicants can offer higher amounts than the 500 million minimum or the minimum of 25 or 10%, but those are the absolute minimums that have to be offered in order for the application to even be considered. So then we move into stage 2, the evaluation. Things are now before the licensing board because they have been approved by the 2/3 vote of the Community Advisory Committee. They've gotten all their land use permits and approvals. Then they come to us. We cannot consider any application until all applications are before us, so they have to be considered together. And we are under very specific criteria about what we can consider, how much weight we have to give to those things, and then how we put it all together. So 70% of the weight goes to economic activity and business development, and that's everything from capital investment and revenues, the number of quality jobs, the variety of amenities, the site locations benefits, any recapture of money that people in New York, residents of New York, are taking out of state to gamble, the speed at which the casino could come to market, how long it will take to construct it, et cetera, the ability to fully finance the development, the proposed development, and their experience in developing and operating quality gaming facilities. So that's 70% of the weight that will be given in the selection process. Another 10% will be given to local impacts. How well did the proposal mitigate any impacts on the surrounding neighborhood, the surrounding municipality? How well does the applicant propose to partner with local hotels, restaurants, retail facilities, other local establishments? And how well does the applicant propose to partner with live entertainment venues, theaters, entertainment spaces, that kind of thing that may be impacted by the casino? Another 10% goes to the workforce plan. The workforce plan has to tell us how it's going to use existing labor force, the number of construction jobs, how it's going to develop training programs, how it's going to develop methods for applicants to access employment opportunities. It has to explain to us how it is going to train employees to recognize signs that a particular individual may have a problem with gambling and needs help with that problem. They have to show us that they have reached an agreement with organized labor, including hospitality services. And they have to show us that they have developed a work plan that will encourage practices, or that will require practices that promote the development of a skilled and diverse workforce with access to better jobs, to promotion opportunities. There is another 10% that goes for the diversity plan. So they need to tell us the demographics, including the demographics of their current employment of people of color, minorities, women, service disabled veterans. They have to show us what diversity they have in terms of the ownership and leadership of the corporate entity that will be the entity holding the casino. And they have to tell us what efforts they will take to ensure diversity at their existing facilities, and how they plan to ensure diversity at the proposed casino. So taking all that into account, the licensing board will try to find the best of the applicants and grant them licenses, up to 3 licenses, not 3 in the downstate area. They don't all have to go to one municipality. They don't all have to go to any municipality, right? But once the commission determines that a applicant should receive one of the licenses, then it goes to the gaming commission that I mentioned earlier, the regulatory body, and they will do an additional determination that the applicant meets the criteria that the law sets to get a license. And following licensure, the commission will issue the operator a certificate when the facility is ready to open to the public. So that is the process in a nutshell. And I'm happy later to answer any questions about that process. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Vicki. Very thorough. And I know we have lots of questions for you later, so we'll be hearing from you later on. And next, I'm going to turn it over to an expert from the Urban-Brookings Tax Policy Center, Lucy Dadayan. I'm sorry, I should have practiced in advance. Who's going to speak on casino tax revenue and jobs impact. And Lucy has done quite a bit of research on this as a principal research associate at the Urban-Brookings Tax Policy Center. So turning it over to you, Lucy.
Good evening, everyone. I hope everyone can see my screen well. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. Thank you, dear Senator Krueger, for inviting me.
Sorry to interrupt you, Lucy. We see your screen, but we're not actually seeing your PowerPoint. We just see your browser.
I knew this is gonna happen. Sorry.
No problem.
Now you can see, I hope.
Yep, that's much better. Thank you.
Sorry for that. Thank you, everyone. And a little disclaimer, views presented tonight are my own views and do not represent my employer's view. So one of the main reasons why state officials usually look into inspection of casinos is revenues. Today, we will take a look at tax revenues for casinos over time. Now, let's take a look at some numbers. In fiscal year 2019, state and local governments have raised around $10 billion from all casinos and casino operations. And that number represented less than 1% of total state tax revenues in fiscal year 2019. By comparison, revenues from lottery operations actually represented 2%. And of course, revenues from major sources of taxes, such as personal income, general sales tax, and corporate income taxes, were much higher share of total state tax revenues. If we look at compound annual growth rates for the period between fiscal year 2010 and 2019, average annual growth rate for casinos was 3%, which is much weaker compared to that percentage for total taxes, which was 4.9%, or for major sources of taxes. For example, for personal income tax, compound annual growth rate was 6.2% between 2010 and 2019. And for example, for sales tax, it was 4.6%. Now, if we look at the nominal growth rate for casinos and for tax revenues from casinos and casinos from fiscal year 2019 through fiscal year 2022, it increased by 16%. And don't forget that fiscal year 2022 was the year when we were seeing revenue surge from all major sources of taxes. And again, that growth rate was much weaker when compared to growth rate experienced by major sources of taxes. For total tax revenues, the growth rate was around 33%. Now, $271 billion. That's the amount that the states have raised from casinos and casinos in the past 46 years, from fiscal year 1978 to fiscal year 2023. And that's in inflation-adjusted terms. In nominal terms, it was only $200 billion. If you wanted to have an idea of what it means, for example, in fiscal year 2023 alone, the state tax revenues for the state of California were much higher compared to that $271 billion. In other words, in 46 years, that tax revenues were really only $271 billion. The following figure shows inflation-adjusted tax revenues from casinos and casinos for the last 40 years, from fiscal year 1983 to fiscal year 2023. Now, the numbers on the bars indicate the number of states that had operational commercial casinos in a given year. For example, in 1983, there were only 2 states with commercial casinos, those states being Nevada and New Jersey. And by fiscal year 2023, we had 27 states. So you see this increasing number of states entering into the market. And each time there is a downturn, economic downturn, recession, we see more states coming into the market. And the first wave was in 1991 recession, when we have another wave for around 2001 recession. And of course, we had more states entering into the market post Great Recession, and 2 more states entered into the market post-pandemic recession, both states being Nebraska and Virginia. But you see that despite so many states coming into the market in inflation-adjusted terms, the revenue growth has been very minimum. The following figure shows inflation-adjusted tax revenues from casinos and racinos by states since inception through fiscal year 2023 for each state. So for New York, we see that New York actually legalized its first racinos in fiscal year 2004, and since 2004, the state generated only $16.5 billion from casino and casino operations. And the following figure shows year-over-year percentage change in inflation-adjusted casino and casino tax revenues. The state labels in this chart indicate that the state started operations of casinos in that given year. For example, you see that South Dakota entered into the market in fiscal year 1990, Iowa entered into the market in fiscal year 1991, etc. Let's take a look at the overall trend, which is the red line. The overall growth trend has been downward, and the revenues increase when there are new states entering into the market, when there is an expansion of casinos. And that's particularly much vivid in the past decade. You see in fiscal years 2014, for example, the tax revenues have declined. And when Massachusetts opens its first casinos in fiscal year 2015, there is a little bit of growth when there is stagnation of revenue growth from casinos and racinos until Arkansas comes into the market, when we have, of course, the pandemic and casinos are closed across the nation because of the pandemic. We see steep decline, and the steep increase in the following years was just a reflection of the lower base. And in fiscal year 2023, we have Nebraska and Virginia entering into the market, but still compared to 2022, the revenues have declined. Now, the following figure shows the cumulative percentage change in inflation-adjusted tax revenues from casinos and racinos for the nation as a whole, which is the red line, and for early adopter states. In other words, the blue line excludes revenues for 5 states only, which opened their first casinos after fiscal year 2012. Those states are Arkansas, Massachusetts, Nebraska, Ohio, and Virginia. And you see that without those new states, the revenues have seen steady decline. And in fiscal year 2010, there were only 6 states where tax revenues from casinos and racinos represented more than 5% of total tax revenues. Those states were Delaware, Indiana, Louisiana, Nevada, Rhode Island, and West Virginia. As of 2023, Nevada was the only state where tax revenues from casinos and racinos represented more than 6% of the total tax revenues. And you see that over time, all the states, including Nevada, tax revenues from casinos and racinos, a share of total tax revenues, have declined over time. Let's take a look at some casinos in some states. I'll start with Pennsylvania because this is the state that has been generating lots of revenues from casinos and racinos, and also it's the state that has been aggressively opening new casinos. Actually, Pennsylvania opened 5 more casinos in the last 3 years, and the total number of casinos in Pennsylvania right now are 17. As well as Pennsylvania introduced interactive gaming in 2019. So this chart shows year-over-year inflation-adjusted percentage change for Pennsylvania's casino tax revenues. And the red line shows the total tax revenues, including interactive gaming, The blue line shows the same, but excludes the interactive gaming revenues, which have been introduced in July of 2019. And the light blue line shows the total tax revenues, excluding the interactive gaming, as well as excluding revenues from the 5 casinos that have been opened in the last 3 years. And you see that without the new form of gaming, without interactive gaming, and without including the revenues from the 5 newly opened casinos, the revenues have been declining for the state. Let's take a look at the casino in Philadelphia, which was opened in September of 2010. It was initially called Sugar House Casino, and it had already rebranded itself to be called Rivers Casino Philadelphia. And it's located only less than 1.5 miles from the city center, from the old town of Philadelphia. So fairly urban casino. And if we look at the inflation-adjusted tax revenue trends from Rivers Casino Philadelphia, we see that we have seen steady decline. The blue line is the dollars, the revenues generated from the Rivers Casino Philadelphia, and the red line is the overall trend line. You see that the revenues were at the peak in its first full operational year in fiscal year 2012, whereas in fiscal year 2023, that dollar amount was half of what it had generated in its first operational year, only $80 million. Now let's move to Anchor Boston Harbor Resort at Wynn Resort Casino, which was opened in June 2019. The following figure shows nominal tax revenues from this casino, and you see not much growth in the last 2.5 years. It's a monthly data, and it shows year-over-year monthly revenues from the casino. And the following figure shows year-over-year percentage change for Boston Harbor Casino, and you see that overall trend again has been declining, and there has been steep declines, particularly in the last 18 months. Chicago opened its first land-based casino in September of 2023. So it's only been open 5-6 months, not a lot of data to show, but we know already that in the first 4 months of casino operation, the city generated around $3.1 million from the casino taxes, and it's nearly 10 million short of the forecast. And it's important to mention that revenue forecasts from casinos are always overestimated. Now, if I was an official in Illinois, I would have looked at the revenue growth in other casinos, and the following figure shows nominal casino tax revenues since inception in the state of Illinois, and you see that since fiscal year 1992 until 2006, 2007, there has been steady growth in revenues, but then we see steady decline in revenues from casino taxes, and these are in nominal terms. Now let's move to New York. The following map shows the location of casinos, Racino's Indian Gaming, and the chart is from the New York State Gaming Commission. We took a look at the revenue trends for New York and for the state in total. Tax revenues from all casinos and casinos have declined by 8.5% in fiscal year 2022 compared to 2019, and that drop was 10.3% in fiscal year 2023 compared to 2019. Of course, there is also Resorts World Casino in New York City, which is located very close to JFK. And if we look at the revenue trends for Resorts World Casino, they have declined by 25.4% in 2023 compared to 2019. As I said, Resorts World Casino is located very close to JFK, which is perfect location if you are attracting domestic and international casino tourists, because ideally, if the tourists want to go to casino, they will jump from the airport to the casino. But if we look at the nominal tax revenues from the Resorts World Casino in New York City, again, not much growth in the last 18 months. And actually, just like in other cases, we see steep declines in the past 18 months. So what implications do we have? Casinos offer entertainment, dining, and shopping options, and that can create competition for the nearby businesses, particularly for restaurants, retail shops, entertainment. And increased competition also means that they can potentially lead to decline in revenues for nearby businesses, which can increase the risk of bankruptcy for those nearby businesses. And it also creates traffic, it creates congestion in parking, which could deter customers from visiting nearby businesses. There is economic substitution that can be that should be taken into the consideration. While casinos may attract tourists and visitors to the city, they often lead to economic substitution, where money spent at the casinos is money taken from other local businesses. And casinos create job opportunities in the area for sure, but they also affect the job market for the existing businesses. One thing to remember is that if the casino is big in size, it creates more low-skilled work jobs rather than highly skilled jobs, which is also problematic, because if you wanted to have economic growth, you should be attracting more high-skilled jobs. And the ripple effect, sorry, I don't know what happened in here. Here you go. So casinos can also have an impact on property value. Of course, the location is very important. Casinos located in close proximity to residential neighborhoods can have a pronounced effect on property values compared to those situated in more isolated or commercial areas. Quality of life is important. Casinos can lead to increased traffic, noise, and crime, and those can really potentially have a detrimental effect on property values. There is also, of course, perception and stigma related to casinos. Some residents might perceive casinos as undesirable neighbors because they bring crime, they bring addiction and other social issues, and those perceptions could lead to lower property values. And there is, of course, a ripple effect that decreased property values could lead to lower property tax revenues, which means that they would negatively impact the city budget. In brief, casinos are not really a bonanza for state and local budgets. Revenues from casinos are always volatile. They can deteriorate or decrease over time. They actually do deteriorate and decrease over time. They are relatively small. They are not going to fund your education budget, or they are not going to fund your other critical social services. Casino expansions brings in more revenue, but that's temporary until a saturation point is reached. Some new revenue represents just a shift, substitution, rather than net growth. And the future growth in casino revenues will not keep up with the pace of spending growth. So gambling in general is not a solution in the never-ending quest to balance budgets. We have tons of resources on our website. Please feel free to reach out if you need more data. I have data for all states, since the inception of casinos and racinos. And with that, I'll take questions as we end the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy. I know there will be many questions that you will be asked to address a little bit later, based on, since I already have the questions in advance and I see the new ones pouring in. So our next speaker, representing local business concerns, casino impacts on local businesses, is Tom Kirdahy, a theatrical producer with the Broadway League. And we understand that Tom is speaking to us from London tonight, so we appreciate him staying up extra late to be with us. Good evening, Tom.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tom Kirdahy. I represent the Broadway League, and I am one of the lead producers of Hadestown on Broadway and Little Shop of Horrors off Broadway. Additionally, I've produced musicals such as Anastasia and plays such as The Inheritance and It's Only a Play. I'm zooming in from, as has been said, I'm zooming in from London tonight because I'm one of the producers of Hadestown, which opened in the West End last night. And I think it's important to mention that because Broadway is a global brand. Hadestown won the Tony Award, and at the opening last night, I was inundated by people here in London talking about how Broadway is a dream of theirs. And I was raised on Long Island, and as a young boy, my family took me to see Broadway shows, and that fed the passion that I had to one day work in this space. As you all know, Broadway is coming back after a pandemic, and there is a deep concern in my community that that by permitting a casino in the Times Square area, we would be welcoming a cannibalistic entity into the community. Unlike film and television, Broadway is singular. It exists in one place, in the Times Square area. People come from all over the world to see Broadway shows. We are known as a theater district. Anything that could dilute from that can be damaging to what is a fragile community and a unique community. We are Broadway. I often say that we represent CNC, culture and community. We have relationships with restaurants and civic institutions throughout the community. We are career builders. I bring now that I'm an adult working in this community, I brought my nieces and nephews when they were growing up to see shows because it's a family experience that has existed over generations. And now I'm bringing my great nieces and nephews. There's a deep concern amongst us in the Broadway theater community that bringing a casino into the area will have a dilution on the impact and the global brand that Broadway is. We have an extraordinary economic impact on the community, as you all know, and we have a reputation as the center of culture. The theater, and Broadway specifically, is a uniquely American art form. People come from all over the world to experience Broadway shows. And part of the success of our brand is the singularity of that experience. Wherever we go, whenever I have a show tour across the country, the dream is always to come see a Broadway show. When people talk about coming to New York, they talk about the Broadway experience. And we have been focused, we remain focused on developing our art form, continuing our art form, and having it return after the devastation of the pandemic to all that it can be and all that it represents across the globe. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but I think the most important thing that we want to communicate is that we're a unique export. We uniquely export our singular American art form. And Broadway doesn't exist in any other community anywhere else. Film and television come into our homes. We can go to the theater anywhere across the country, but there's only one neighborhood that represents the Broadway community, and we need to preserve the sanctity of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Appreciate your getting on late with us from London. And our next presenter, actually it's our last presenter before getting to questions, to discuss the impact on individuals and families is Les Bernal, the executive director of the group Stop Predatory Gambling. And I'm delighted that he could join us to share his perspective tonight. Good evening, Les.
Good evening to everyone on this meeting tonight. And you can learn more about our organization from our website, stoppredatorygambling.org. So I just have 10 minutes tonight to talk with you. And so I'm going to focus on just 3 facts to share with you. I think 3 of the most important facts that influence this fight in your region. And it's 3 facts that you should know about America's most neglected major problem, is what we describe the issue of predatory gambling today. So the first thing I want to share with you is kind of give you a sense what's the difference between social gambling and predatory gambling. You know, so we're not talking about the Super Bowl office pools and Friday night poker games and that type of thing. There's social forms of gambling. That's not at all. The gambling industry does everything it can to kind of blur all forms of gambling together. This is about predatory gambling. And so I kind of give a clear definition here on the screen of what it is, but just to kind of summarize it, it's when state governments, and the state is a key part of this. The state governments partner with powerful corporate gambling interests to use commercialized gambling. Commercialized is the key word here, to use commercialized gambling to exploit and defraud citizens and their communities. So by commercialized means you're running gambling as a business, okay? You're running gambling as a business. And so when you do that, inherently, unlike any other business in the world, it creates an adversarial relationship between the gambling operator and the citizen who's gambling. There's no other business that's trying to take you down, okay? That's why commercialized gambling is illegal in our country, except for one exception, and that's when you partner with state government, okay, in the name of revenues. And you heard Lucy Dadayan just demolish that whole con of this idea that brings revenues in. This is driven by greed. So when we're talking about predatory gambling, we're talking about this adversarial relationship between the gambling operator and the gambler. And that runs throughout this business for the last 40 years in America. So the first fact I'm going to share with you tonight is this, is that commercialized gambling today is recognized by the science as a known, dangerous, and addictive product. All right. So we're not talking about bringing Starbucks in or some kind of amusement park or that type of thing. That commercialized gambling today is recognized as an addiction in the same category as heroin, cocaine, and opioids under the American Psychiatric Association's DSM-5, which is, for those of you who know anything about the DSM-5, that's, you know, it's how hospitals use it, doctors' offices use it, your health insurance companies, everyone else. It's referred to as the mental health Bible. That's what establishes the diagnoses for mental health issues in our country today. And they recognize gambling addiction as severe as cocaine, opioids, and heroin. Like, that's the kind of intense product you're talking about bringing in to highly densely populated regions in the greater New York City area. So that's what we're talking about. So this it's important because they love to minimize the addictive nature of this product. So don't let them do that. The science tells us otherwise. All right. And just to be clear, because you hear a lot about the benefit of the so-called claim that casinos are going to bring in to your state of New York or any other region is, well, it's about jobs, right? As if sometimes that job is the final arbiter of every decision we make. The reality is, in state after state, and this is especially true in a state like Illinois, okay? Illinois has more than 10 casinos. And so in a state like Illinois, the facts show that the casinos cause so much addiction, okay, that they create more gambling addicts than they do jobs. All right. And this is just kind of the tip of the iceberg. So the state of Illinois has something called the self-exclusion program, where the gambling industry and the state governments, they have this kind of scheme they call self-exclusion, which is really just a gimmick to give the appearance that citizens are being protected. But self-exclusion is you, the addict, has to have to come forward and put yourself on a list to ban yourself from the casino. Okay, the casino's not going to cut you off. So the amount of people that actually come forward to put themselves on the list, it's like, roughly only, 90% of gambling addicts never come forward for help. So you're really looking at just roughly 10% of the population that ever comes forward for help. But even still, the number of people on the self-exclusion list in Illinois is like thousands more people on that list than there's people that work at the state's casinos, both full-time and part-time jobs. I mean, it's unbelievable. So think of another business in America that creates so much more human suffering and human tragedy at the expense of somebody who works there. There's no equivalent to it. Okay. So that's why when you have labor unions and these guys standing up, saying that we want these jobs, like their jobs come at someone else's expense. There's an enormous amount of human suffering that has to cause. There's going to be far more addicts that are created for that one union job. And unions are supposed to represent jobs with justice. And these are jobs with injustice. So fact number 2, and this is a key part of this revenue model. So you heard that the Vicky Bean presented all the criteria that the state looks at when they look at casino projects. Like they're not looking to protect you, the citizen. They're not looking to see, does this benefit the people at all? They're looking at money. What's the money involved with this? It's driven by greed, not to benefit the public interest. So the key fact here is this, is that more than half the profits, the gambling profits in a casino, come from citizens who've been turned into gambling addicts. And the casual gambler, which we hear so much about, like, oh, I just go to a casino with the money, I came with, and then I go home. Like the casual gambler, they're irrelevant to the casino business model. This is a business based on an addiction, creating addicts, cultivating addicts, exploiting addicts, and then the casual player is irrelevant. And it's all done in partnership with state government. They work. It's a very unique thing. No state attorney general in this country, including New York, has ever brought litigation against a predatory gambling operator once they were legalized by the state, because the state becomes a partner to it all. All these issues around predatory business practices, they become a quote unquote regulatory issue. And the more you quote unquote regulate this to protect the public, the less profits for the state. So the 2 key questions you want to ask any gambling lobbyist, any legislator who carries the water for the industry on this stuff, anyone who's pushing this stuff, ask them these 2 questions. Is what % of gambling profits is based upon citizens who become addicted gamblers? As I said, it's more than half. And that fact comes right from the Atlantic Monthly, did an incredible story in December of 2016 about how casinos enable gambling addiction, or how they enable gambling addicts. That's the title of the cover story they did. And so more than 9 independent studies show that addicted gamblers generate up to 60% of revenues. Okay, it's stunning. That's why this business is illegal unless you partner with the state. And the other key fact here, the key question I love to ask all these people who promote casinos in local communities is this. So what % of gambling profits come from citizens who practice these so-called responsible gambling codes of conduct? State government and these gambling operators do, with much fanfare, promote these responsible gambling campaigns. Even if you watch, sports today, you have the NFL talking about, responsible gambling. So how much of the gambling industry profits come from those people that practice responsible gambling? This is right from NYU professor Natasha Shull, who was the feature of a 60-minute segment a few years ago for her book, Addiction by Design, which was about the technology behind specifically electronic gambling machines. And she had her study in that book that showed that roughly about 75% of the people walking into a casino were a so-called casual player. They were a so-called responsible gambler. They made up 4% of gambling revenues, okay? 4%. They're irrelevant to the business model. Okay, so this idea that somehow there's not going to cause any harm in your region, it's absurd. Okay, that's why these gambling operators spend millions of dollars lobbying to ram these projects into your communities. Okay, and the proof is in the pudding here. Just in the entire world. Okay, just think about the alcohol industry, right? It's a huge industry, a multi-million-dollar industry of folks that push non-alcoholic drinks, non-alcoholic beer and so on. In the entire world. You would think if responsible gambling was a real thing, that there'd be a gambling operator who present themselves, market themselves as, hey, we're the responsible gambling operator in America, or we're the responsible gambling operator in New York. Yet there's not a single one that markets themselves that way. And why? Because it's not a financially viable business model. This is a business model that is illegal because it's so predatory and it's so harmful to the American public. It's only legal when you partner with state government. And the last fact I'll share with you tonight is that local casinos, they exploit the little guy. All right, so just put some real numbers on this. Like you heard that thing about the amount of money that states are going to get, all these big numbers that the gambling operators push out there. Like, where's all this money come from? It comes from your neighbors. It comes from your family members, from people you work with. Okay, like, this doesn't come out of the sky someplace. So just to put real numbers on this, like the local casinos, and we're not talking about Vegas. We're talking about Vegas on Main Street today, which is what we're talking about. Vegas in Manhattan or Vegas in Queens. That's what this fight's about. So local casinos are one of the root causes of the financial distress and the lack of mobility out of poverty today that faces millions of American families. All right. And so real numbers here, over the next 6 years, the American people are on course to lose more than $1 trillion of personal wealth to predatory gambling. Okay. It's more than $150 billion a year, and it's almost $300,000 every minute. So I'm going to speak for 10 minutes tonight. More than $3 million, almost $3 million is going to be lost by the American people in the course of this conversation. Okay. Unbelievable. So both political parties, hold their hands up how much we need to help the American people, expand the middle class, provide more opportunity. Like, this is Exhibit A. It's why we call it America's most neglected major problem. This is the solution for, if you're low income today in America, we're forcing casinos into your communities, to attract that demographic and take as much money as we can from folks. And we talk about who kind of people are going to be coming to the casino, like who their business model is. No one's flying into Manhattan to gamble at a local casino, or Queens or Long Island or Coney Island or any of these communities. It's going to be local people. All right. So the business model for all these local casinos today across our country that is spread across like a cancer is it's people. People used to go to a casino maybe a couple of times, a handful of times a year. Now the business model for casinos are people going to casinos almost 5 to 6 times a week. They've become everyday gamblers. So you're going to have people in New York City today going to a local casino 5 to 6 times a week. As a government program, we're doing that. This is an extension of a government program. So the question I always ask public officials, state and local, like, why would any public official advocate for something that would cause their constituents to lose money, big money, at casinos up to 5 to 6 times a week? Okay. So the last thought I'll leave you with is this. This is one of my favorite facts about this. So here you have Meryl Streep accepting an Oscar, because you have the casino industry and the promoters of casinos. They'll say, oh, we're just another entertainment option. We're just like going out to dinner, going to the theater at Broadway, or like going to the movies or whatever it may be. Okay. This, having a glass of wine, etc. Commercialized gambling is the only product or service in the world where the people that own it and promote it don't use it. Okay, so Meryl Streep, she watches the movie she makes. The local restaurant chef, he eats the food he serves. The winemaker drinks the wine he makes. Casino operators, the slot machine makers, most of the public officials who lobby for this industry, all the gambling proponents, none of these people gamble themselves. And the way you can go to our homepage of our website has a whole thing on it. We call it the Hypocrites Hall of Fame. We've collected all these quotes, and there's a lot of folks from New York on there who push this industry into communities, push it into the state, but they don't gamble themselves. That's part of the con of this whole thing. So it's not, they have retirement funds, they own homes, they have investments for their kids' college. Half the country doesn't have any of those things, but it's great for those families to be going to casinos 5 times a week. But all these other casino operators, etc., they don't gamble. And anyone who thinks like the stock market's gambling, it's not. If you're a day trader or you're doing derivatives, yeah, that's a form of gambling for sure. It's a form of speculation. But if you're investing in the stock market, buy an index fund, that type of thing, you're investing. You're over the long term, you're going to make money. So there's no comparison between investing in stocks and casino gambling. And the last image I'll leave you with here is New York's, Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia is considered by most scholars in the country as the greatest mayor in American history. That's a real image from almost 100 years ago, where how public officials used to go after predatory businesses. So there was a whole ring of, slot machine operators in the city. LaGuardia rounded these guys up, collected all the slot machines, smashed them with a sledgehammer, put them on a barge, and he dumped the machines into New York Harbor. He stood up for working men and women of greater New York City. That's what he did. Okay. and the opposite today, the message of many public officials and get in our really in our these gambling operators today, it's totally different. It's like, this is good for you somehow, right? We need to get back to this message to protect the American people from predatory businesses and get back into making our communities better, things that improve people's lives. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you tonight, and I'm interested in any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Les. I appreciate your presentation. I appreciated all the presentations. And we're now at the point where we're going to start the Q&A portion of the event. We received an enormous number of questions that people submitted when they RSVP'd, and there have been more coming in. Oh my goodness, I see it's a count of 40 additional questions since the event has started. So we're not going to get to everybody's questions. I'm sorry, but we're not going to be able to stay on as many hours as it would take. And we are scheduled to close down by 8:30. But I'm going to try to get to as many as possible. And I'm going to highlight ones that I think haven't already been answered, because many of the questions we got, actually people have answered with their presentations. And again, some terrific resource materials have been put in chat. They will be sent out to you as long as you RSVP'd. Their PowerPoints will be sent out to you. So the information flow doesn't stop just because this webinar actually does stop at 8:30. So again, there'll be lots of other ways to get information and follow up. I am going to ask the speakers if they will turn their videos back on and join me. Thank you. All right, so there were many questions already about the siting of casinos, and that was really Vicky's whole presentation. But quite a few people have asked, can we just stop all of them from being here in New York City at all? And I'm going to choose to answer it, because in order to start any of the steps, and Vicky did talk about it in one of her slides, first, New York City has to pass a zoning resolution to allow casinos in the city of New York, because we don't allow casinos now in the city of New York. And so there is a mayor's proposal that would shift it to a everybody at once, as opposed to each site going through its own ULURP as far as being a casino zoning review process. But technically, if you want to lobby your city council members to say, we don't think this is a great idea for anywhere, or we want to make sure that there is a very specific public process where people get to submit the arguments to why they just don't want casinos at all, I believe that can still be done. Is that your understanding, Vicky?
It is. That is exactly right.
Right, so it's not part of your commission's role, but that is a requirement within the city law. So I wanted to make sure I just said that up front. And that many of the questions, relate to all the politics, but I don't think it's fair to ask our speakers. So let me just run back. Are your elected officials, mayor, governor, city council members, supporting casinos in New York City? Obviously, each person has to answer, but as far as I know, both the mayor of the city of New York and the governor of the state of New York do support the expansion of casinos and have been quite public about that. And each individual city council member, you would just have to check with them, because I have no way to know that. So Lucy, in your data and your materials, there was quite a bit about impacts on the casinos in various parts of the country, both the revenue not being what people thought it would be, but also negative impacts on property taxes. I think in particular was a real concern, and property values. So are there any specific reports that you can get us references to follow up on that question? Because that's always a very hot topic in Manhattan. What's the impact on the property values of our neighborhoods, and what would be the impact on lost taxes if we have a loss in property value?
Sure, I'm happy to send literature review on the topic. That's not my area of expertise, but a literature review shows that there is a negative impact. Of course, there is There are pros and cons of casinos, and depending on the location, on the community, but the urban areas are much problematic because it can have a much more negative impact on the property values, because the urban areas tend to have higher crime rate, it can increase the crime rate even more as compared to more isolated commercial areas. Happy to send material on the topic to be shared with the listeners.
Great, and then we'll share it with everybody who has RSVP'd for tonight or who checks in with us afterwards. Thank you, because I know that many of the questions coming in tonight and questions that came before are very much correlated to immediate impact on neighborhoods. And obviously crime is a big part of that, but also the decreasing value of the property where people live and the impact on whether they own or are trying to sell. So I just want to make sure we get as much information to people as possible. So I think this one is for Vicky. So what group or board or agency will be given the power to oversee and regulate the casinos if they're open? And are the members of said board or agencies appointed by whom and for how long a term? And you referenced in your presentation that, you know, none of you can have a conflict of interest or be involved in gambling. But is that also true for the umbrella board or agency that will have responsibility once these casino licenses, if they are approved, are approved?
So you are correct that it is the Gaming Commission that is the regulator once a license is issued. I believe that they are all appointed by the governor. There may be some other people who are involved in appointing them. I actually don't know how long their terms are. They are subject to the conflict of interest and anti-lobbying. I mean, there is a designated person in the Gaming Commission who a lobbyist can contact for information, for that kind of thing. Only one designated person who is just who is a staffer on the commission.
Okay. And I guess it's back to Lucy, but I guess it's an open or broader question. Has anybody been doing research on, when you look at, there's revenue coming in, but we know that there's costs of having casinos, there's increased crime costs, there's increased NYPD costs, there may be lowered property values and lower property taxes. Are there studies out there showing that even when you think you're at least getting some bump in your tax revenue because you've had casinos, that it actually doesn't add up that way? And I'll throw less into this because I would also argue, I think, that if people are pouring all their money into a casino through a gaming addiction, that means they're not paying their rent, potentially not paying their utilities, perhaps not their health insurance, and become a new set of costs to the locality to address the concerns that, you know, they aren't able to take care of themselves and their families. So I'll give it to both of you on this.
Sure. So Lucy, I'll just add one point and I'll invite you to jump in. I mean, the facts about, you know, how casinos are you know, from a revenue standpoint are an ultimate budget gimmick. Like this isn't new news. Like we've known this for 30 years. Some of the best research ever done on this issue was done, you know, almost 20 years ago now, written by a member of the presidential team of economic advisors, a guy named Dr. Earl Grinnells, wrote a very famous book called Gambling in America, where this was like early 2000 figures. So I don't know what they would be today by inflation, but he found that for every dollar of revenue that you know commercialized gambling brings in, it costs $3 in social costs to the public. You know, like, so that's why, like, the line is you pay, if you're never going to gamble, like, you pay even if you don't play. You know, like you're going to pay over the long term higher taxes for less services, because this is the ultimate budget gimmick. As Lucy is the best in the country presenting the data around, you know, gambling revenues, and that she did another great job tonight, kind of walking everybody through how this works. It's the ultimate budget gimmick. There's no grassroots movement for any of this. It's driven by powerful financial interests who stand to make, you know, billions of dollars out of the pockets of millions of New Yorkers.
Lucy?
So,
Yeah.
yeah, so actually there was a question in the chat as well for Q&A for the source of revenues. There is a good data on revenues, and all the data comes from the gaming regulatory agencies for each single state. Unfortunately, there isn't good data on social costs because some of the social costs are not captured. All the social costs associated with addiction, with bankruptcy, with crime. And the social costs are much higher than we can capture on based on the data. But one source that I would recommend is Professor Douglas Walker, who is a professor of economics at the College of Charleston. He has done studies, and his study shows that gaming increases the crime rate as well as other social costs associated.
Thank you. Quite a few people are actually typing in questions, or some we got in advance of. So why are you elected seeming to all support this? Because it's moving forward. And I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Senator Kristen Gonzalez, who wanted to jump in. Hi, Kristen.
Hi, thank you so much, Senator Krueger, and really appreciative of all of the presentations tonight and presenters. This information was incredibly helpful. I wanted to hop in here because I think, we talked about the CAC composure, or it being composed of different elected officials. The reason we're having this town hall and had the town hall we had last month was to collect public comment. And I at least want to speak for myself and our office, because the community is so overwhelmingly voiced that casinos are not what we want, but instead what we want is affordable housing and green space and things that improve our quality of life. Our office will not be supporting this casino proposal barring any significant change in public opinion. So I say this to really motivate those of you who are here tonight and interested in knowing what to do next, because by coming to town halls like this, by participating, it's directly informing at least myself and can inform the other elected officials involved as well. So to Senator Krueger's point earlier, it's always good to reach out to your local electeds because we receive those comments and it informs how we move forward.
Thank you. And that triggers another question that I have for Vicki, because of her background in being a housing expert and spending her days working on housing for New York City. So several of the casino applicants seem to say in their public materials or even at Kristen's town hall that let us build our casino and we're going to build you affordable housing. And we all know if you talk about building affordable housing in Manhattan, you get a whole lot of ears perked up, right? So my confusion, and this all ties into the zoning also, at least two of these sites, they're already obligated by previous ULURPs to have to build affordable housing or not actually be able to build. So I just want to double check because there seems to be two different storylines out there. Whatever happens with zoning for casinos or individual zoning ULURPs they might have to go through for their proposal, that doesn't negate an existing agreement in law that they've already made on that land. Is that correct?
So, Senator, I'm going to answer that as a hypothetical. I actually am not seeing any of the proposals because I cannot see them or I cannot consider them until they are all before me. So I'm just going to consider, I don't know about the two proposals that you mentioned, but hypothetically, if they are obligated already because of either a mandatory inclusionary or something like that, then whatever somebody would build now could in certain circumstances satisfy that obligation, but you'd really have to look at what that obligation is, what they're providing, whether there's a duplicate obligation. If there's a duplicate obligation, they should have to meet it twice, right? And the community advisory commissions can flag that or can vote against it because of that issue. And it is certainly something, I can't speak on behalf of the the entire board, it is certainly something that I would be looking at when I see an application.
I certainly agree. And just to clarify, in case it wasn't clear to people, yes, these community advisory commissions are made up of, in New York City, 6 representatives or their appointees. And that is a rep from the governor, the mayor, the state senator, the state assembly member, the city council member, and the borough president of the overlapping area. So when we did introductions before, my colleague, Senator Brad Hoylman, says, I believe I have 2 applications in my district. Senator Gonzalez says, I believe we have 1 application in my district. And speaking for Liz Krueger, I believe I have 2 applications in my district. That totals that 5. Obviously, we won't know for sure until applications are completed and go in or don't go out. I guess it's a little late for more to come on the scene, or can more still come on the scene?
More could come on the scene. I mean, the due date has not yet come due. It hasn't even been announced. So somebody could put in an application up to the final day of that due date.
Yeah. So lots of people have written questions about their concern about increased crime. Obviously, if I'm a simple thief, so to speak, if people are walking out of a casino late at night and they have really big smiles on their face, I probably think that's a good person to go bop over the head. If they're crying into their drink, maybe not such a good person to bop over the head. So I do know that there is a correlation between local criminal activity, even as people leave the casinos. That's been documented in many places. But people are also asking about, is organized crime involved in casinos in America? And should we be concerned about what are we doing about that? So I think both for Lucy and Les, what is your knowledge and experience about organized crime being involved with casinos?
So Lucy, if you don't mind, I'll take this one first. The key here is, so what we used to envision of organized crime being involved in casinos, they're involved, but in a different way than they were, say, 60 years ago or whatever, when Vegas was getting off the ground. How organized criminal activity is with casinos today is, money laundering and casinos are tied at the hip. All right, it's well documented. Department of Justice, the U.S. Treasury, like, casinos are like the worst offender of our money laundering laws in the United States. And if you're running any kind of criminal business, human sex trafficking, you're dealing hardcore drugs, you're dealing fentanyl, you're bringing in, folks, trafficking, human trafficking of immigrants and so on, like any kind of illegal business, you love the introduction of casinos in your region because it allows you to wash that money. Because what you do is you take, if you have, 10,000, say you take up, you have $1 million you want to wash. You get people to go into the casino. The casino doesn't have to report expenditures above or below $10,000. So you go in with like $9,000 in cash, you push it through a slot machine, you press the button, you cash out, you get the tickets. Oh, look, say now I have $88,800 left, $8,800 left. I take that ticket, that voucher, and I go to the cashier window. And now I take that and I have $8,800 now of gambling winnings. So I can pay taxes on that. So that's what you, as a, they want to be able to wash this money so they can put it into property and all kinds of stuff. So if anything, the introduction of casinos, it creates more of a culture of illegal activity in your region, because anything that needs to wash money, casinos tailor-made for it. And that's not me, just, that's not an opinion. That's the reality. It's the Department of Justice and the U.S. Treasury, has done repeated, spotlights on the casino industry and their inability to stop money laundering practices that occur in the industry.
And Lucy, do you have any additional information from your national research to add to this?
Not on organized crime, because Les has already explained, but I will add that in terms of crime in general, we see a correlation of crime increases But it's mostly non-violent crime, to be perfectly honest, not really necessarily violent crime. So the crime data is available from FBI. A uniform crime reporting shows data for each community. And when you look at the communities that have casinos and look at the crime, you see that the non-violent crime goes up with introduction of a casino. And this is particularly an issue in urban areas where there are casinos, because of course urban areas have higher crime rate, and of course casino brings in more crime.
Thank you. So sticking with crime, and I think Les mentioned it quickly in his answer, there's research showing that casinos are ripe for human trafficking, specifically the forced pimping of young women and men into prostitution. And frankly, New York's already one of the world centers of human trafficking. Can either of you talk about either A, confirming this data, or B, what you think we ought to do, assuming we are going to have casinos, to increase legal penalties to hold the casinos responsible for not growing our human trafficking crisis, or knowing that it's going on in their facilities, both their casino facilities and apparently their associated hotels, based on the research that I was reading.
Sure. Well, I think by any data shows that the place that's the capital of human sex trafficking in the United States is Las Vegas. Okay. And that's not coincidence that they're also a major, the major, predatory gambling capital of our country. And so so there's kind of at least two parts to the reason why, two-part answer why human sex trafficking and casinos go hand in hand. And one is, as I touched on earlier, the money laundering piece of it. If you're running any kind of illicit business, you can wash those profits through casinos. So it encourages people to do these type of illegal businesses, because they can, again, have a way to wash their profits and put them into real, property and that type of thing, using the casinos to wash that cash. But the other thing is, casinos are often used because, again, casinos exist to make money. Like that's why the state is partnering with this. It's all about the money. So like casinos are used in many cases for like to if you're a human sex trafficking, if you're a human sex trafficker, you will oftentimes like meet in casinos, do the exchange in the casino itself. Like the casino industry encourages these types of businesses, especially the human sex trafficking piece, because really it makes, it's the business is driven by greed. So it makes anything else in your community, secondary, like it's if you have a community where you put greed at the center of it, it gives license to all these other predatory businesses and exploitative businesses in your community. That's the reality of it.
So because it is all a business model, and clearly human trafficking is a business model, do we know of any place either in the US or other countries that actually hold the casino owners financially responsible for this activity in their casinos and their hotels? Is it just like everybody knows about it and we put up signs saying don't human traffic people? Or is there, some other model that's actually been successful at stopping this from happening?
It's the latter of what you said. Because this business is essentially a partner of state government. What happens in the casino business is things that, and it's true for lotteries as well, but definitely it is part of the casino business too, is that this business operates with business practices that no other business can get away with. And so, so yes, it can be as posting a sign up that the American Gambling Association, which is the national trade lobby, might do the occasional press release saying, oh, look, we educated our, casino executives at a recent conference on human sex trafficking. They'll have a speaker come in. But like, this is a business that's driven by greed and people's lives and what happens to people. That is totally secondary, to anything else. The bottom line here is greed, and states, because they're a partner to it, as I said earlier in my presentation, no state attorney general has ever brought consumer protection litigation against a commercialized gambling operator once they've been legalized. And that's true for all these other activities. Like as long as that casino's making money, everybody shields their eyes, and it's members of both political parties, frankly, that are part of it. It's not one party, it's not on the left or the right. It's the establishment of both parties are really entrenched with this industry. And that's why we refer to it as America's most neglected major problem.
Thank you. So I don't know that any of you will think you have the right answers for this because it's not your area of expertise, but at least in Manhattan, we all know about congestion pricing, and we all know that it's coming sooner or later, depending on lawsuits, to south of 60th Street, and all 5 of the proposed casinos in Manhattan would be south of 60th Street. And there is some research showing that casino gamblers seem to disproportionately like to drive to and from casinos. They're not necessarily big public transportation users. So a bunch of questions came in about, is this going to be counter what we're trying to do in congestion pricing, which is decrease the number of vehicles coming into the neighborhoods of core Manhattan, and work against our efforts to decrease congestion on our roadways and decrease the pollution from the congestion. So I'm just throwing it out there, not sure that any of you can answer, but quite a few people definitely were asking questions about that. You don't have to me to stump the guests because it wasn't really any of your expertise. But I will say that is, you know, when I was doing some homework for myself on some of the arguments, well, everybody will take mass transit to gamble in Manhattan, I actually learned that gamblers tend to not like public transportation that much, like people who go to football games. I don't know. I don't do either, to be honest, go gamble or go to football games. But I certainly do think that Manhattan, in planning for whether these are good or bad ideas, among the many, many questions we're having tonight, is what will be the additional strain that would be put on a neighborhood if you're going to see a significant increase in vehicle traffic coming and going to these casinos. So again, you know, I don't have an expectation of any of you actually answering that. I guess, Vicky, are we looking at transportation and congestion impacts on the evaluation of the proposals?
Yes, that would count as one of the community impacts that would be considered. And of course, the community advisory commissions can also look at that.
Right.
Mhm.
All right, thank
I
you.
would
Yes.
I would add that there are 2 types of customers for casinos. One is the wealthy ones who tend to gamble a lot, and those customers are definitely not gonna take the public transportation. And then there is the elderly population who usually come in buses. You see it across the nation in all different casinos, buses bringing elderly population who do not drive. So in both cases, they are not the typical transport users, public transportation users.
And certainly that's an experience we know here in New York City, that there are, for casinos not located in New York City, and actually for many, many years, the casinos in Atlantic City, there were free buses that would be, I guess, funded by the Atlantic City casinos to come to New York City, to go to certain corners every day of the week where seniors knew they could get on the bus. I think they would be given X amount of money in quarters to use, I guess back when we used quarters in slot machines. I'm not sure anybody does that now. So my memory may be a little faulty here on how it works today. But when I was familiar with this, when I was working with seniors in my life, they were getting on the buses for a free day in Atlantic City, where they'd get the money and they would say they were just going to go use it to eat food while they had a nice day at the boardwalk. And in my heart, I find it very unlikely that these casino companies were running these daily buses from New York City to Atlantic City so that they could give a bunch of older New Yorkers a nice day on the boardwalk and free money for food. So has anybody looked at the specific impacts on older people in casinos?
Yeah, I mean, the casino industry, across the country, and this would be true for New York as well, it feasts on senior citizens. They market relentlessly to seniors. They'll send buses, as you touched on, to senior citizen population centers, bring folks in, and so you'll have people. Some seniors certainly go and just have a casual. As I said, as you saw from my data point, roughly 75% of the gamblers, citizens that go into a casino are so-called casual gamblers. So a lot of those could be senior citizens. But what the industry's hope is to find those folks that they can get out of control, lure them in with free gambling wagers, keep them in constant action, keep them coming back, several times a week. And then that's the profit center for the industry. That's how they operate. And so enormous amount of seniors, citizens in this country have lost everything to the casino industry. So the AARP has written extensively about the predatory casino business practices. And again, the only reason why the casino industry gets away with it is because state governments are a partner to this activity. If any other any other business was treating senior citizens in our country this way, they'd be shut down. But so in many places, casinos have become the new senior center. So instead of communities investing in good programs for senior citizens, what they do is they turn it over to the casino and let the casino buses take the casinos to the senior citizens. And we do that as an extension of a government program in many places in our country, and including New York.
Yes. I think the next one is definitely for Lucy. And I grew up in New Jersey, by the way, so I remember when Atlantic City suddenly became the center of casinos on the East Coast. I think about 40 years ago or more now. And New Jersey claimed that it was going to turn around Atlantic City, a Rust Belt city with a lot of poverty and very little industry or other economic activity, and that it was going to raise a huge amount of revenue for the state and turn Atlantic City around. And yet it seems that there's been endless research by now that none of that really came to pass. And Atlantic City never seemed to really gain any win from this, perhaps just the opposite. And so based on your research findings, I don't think you did touch on Atlantic City. So what are the lessons of Atlantic City for us looking at this question right now for New York City?
I mean, Atlantic City suffered a lot because of the increased competition in the neighboring states. So that's the only thing that I can say, that the revenues in Atlantic City, as well as in other places where we had casinos for a long time, like we started seeing decline in revenues as new states legalized. And one thing to remember is that usually, I mean, when states legalize casinos and they open new casinos, they try to put it at the border of their state to attract customers from their neighboring states rather than from their own states. And that has been the case, but in general, New Jersey and Atlantic City in particular has suffered a lot as neighboring states have started legalizing and operating their own commercialized casinos.
And again, that's more like the last 10-year story. But again, I go back to when they first opened them up and they were gorgeous and supposedly we're going to bring in a huge amount of people, and they may have, but it didn't seem to improve anything for the people who lived in Atlantic City. It seemed like it actually got worse for them. Am I right?
You are. I'll just add a couple sentences to Lucy's answer, but the evidence and the facts are overwhelming about Atlantic City. And so you said, what are the lessons learned from Atlantic City? The major lesson is that, to learn is that, and this applies to your fight here in New York City, and that is that local casinos have proven to be nothing more than a naked money grab disguised as economic development. Okay, you've had billions of dollars that have been lost over the last 40 years in Atlantic City. Billions and billions of dollars has been lost and spent in that city. Yet today, in 2024, the poverty rate in Atlantic City is higher than it was in 1978. So how is that even possible? It's possible because casinos represent a sterile transfer of wealth from millions of people's pockets into the hands of a very wealthy few. There's no multiplier impact to it. It's the ultimate, the economic impact's the equivalent of throwing $100 bill in the street and then paying somebody a minimum wage to pick it up. It's just a sterile transfer of wealth.
All right, I'm gonna try to stare a little bit, sorry, at the 66 new questions that have come in as we have been having this discussion. And that's a little bit of a challenge for me because I have to try to read these and be articulate. Oh, if there's no zoning for casinos in New York City, why is the Resorts World Casino in Jamaica? Because it's defined as a racino and it's actually on state land, not on city land. So it's an excellent question. I wanted to know that for years also and finally figure that out. So it doesn't have to follow New York City zoning law because it's defined as not being city land. Oh, and that is another then question for you, I think, Vicki. So one of the things that I learned that also was disturbing to me was even though I think as Les are articulating, government's going into these deals because we think we're going to make a whole lot of money on it through taxing the casinos. But I learned that every casino in New York State and Racino that's open so far has gone for separate IDA benefits and other tax abatements at the local level. Will these casinos be allowed to do that too? Doesn't that seem completely contrary to what we think we're doing here by raising our tax revenue, but now we're giving it back to them in abatements? Is there any rule about that in the Sightings Commission?
No, there is no rule about that in the Siting Commission, in the Siting Board. Obviously, the Siting Board could take that into account, and the Community Advisory Commission could take that into account. Whether or not the city or the state would grant IDA benefits is a question for the city or the state, right?
So based on all of the casinos and racinos we have in the state so far, apparently the answer is yes, we will, and we do. Obviously, that's not, the city of New York hasn't faced that question yet. But I think that's just something else for people to factor in. All right. Is there a plan for when co-op condo owners living in an area where a casino opens file a class action lawsuit against the city for harming their quality of life and destroying property value so they can't even sell and move away? Well, I have some background in housing. I am not going to touch whether there's a basis for a lawsuit against the city by building, not just co-op condo owners or actual building owners. Have you ever heard of that, Vicki, since you do have a background in housing?
I mean, a co-op condo, anybody could sue the city or the state in terms of any damage that they feel the casino does. They'd have to prove that it was a nuisance. They'd have to prove that they, had a right to be free of that kind of harm. So it would be, usually those cases are difficult to bring, but not impossible.
Okay. We're a litigious society. It's been my experience that people explore all kinds of options and try to get government to pay attention to their concerns. And my staff have happily sent me some additional of the questions. They sorted through the 67 that are still coming in. What if none of the communities support any of the casino proposals? So all the local siting boards say no. What happens then?
If in New York City, none of the applications are approved by the Community Advisory Commissions, we cannot consider them for a license, period.
So one question is why are application fees so onerous that other New York State areas are precluded from applying where such areas could benefit from development? I think the application fees are intentionally, not just the application fees, the licensing fees are intentionally very high because, again, the state believes that they're doing this to raise revenue. And so if you're a business who doesn't think you can raise a lot of money in gambling, which as Les pointed out, you can probably raise a lot of money for yourself in gambling, but if they don't think they can, then they probably aren't the ones that the state wants to do business with. Do you have another analysis of, I mean, precluding because the costs are too great to apply?
I believe that some of the thinking there is that there already have been 4 licenses granted upstate, and so sort of the economy in the upstate area has been taken into account in the licensing fees and minimum capital investments that were required there, and that the 3 remaining under the constitutional amendment should be much higher priced, and probably therefore geared to downstate.
Thank you. Okay, so this is a question for Lucy, I think, although I'd like to answer it also, but so the numbers shown by you, Lucy, is where's the comparison? So what if the comparison is revenues that aren't as high as anybody thought they would be from a casino versus an empty lot? So isn't that justify these kinds of facilities? And before you answer, I'll just throw in, at least speaking for the parts of Manhattan that all these bids are in, none of them will ever be empty lots. The land value in New York City, and particularly Manhattan, is just too high for there to be empty lots left in Manhattan. But do you have any knowledge from your work, Lucy, that on a more broader basis or other states basis that the trade-offs in urban areas were a casino or absolutely no economic activity instead? No.
Well, Senator, I just may add, on our website, we have a, if you go to the homepage of our website, one of the navigation bars will show you, like, we have success stories where citizens stood up in their community and defeated casino projects because they were told, similar to New York, oh, this is your only chance. You know, if it's not a casino, you have no other option. So there's at least 4 examples there, and one of which is from my home state of Massachusetts. And East Boston, which is part of the city of Boston, had Suffolk Downs racetrack there, and the owners of Suffolk Downs had partnered with Caesars Casino, and there's like, oh, the only option here is to build a casino, you know, and yet the people of East Boston voted the project down, and now, you know, 10 years later, you know, there's like a whole incredible mixed use project going into that property area. So like, it just takes vision, takes political leadership. You know, that's what it is. There's no easy way to build your economy or build your region. It's about doing the work that it takes to build real communities. There's no gimmick here. There's no silver bullet. So anyways, several communities across our country where they said no, rejected it with great vision. They came up with other ideas.
Thank you. I like this question. Is there going to be a meeting for people to hear the other side of the presentations from this evening so we can make an informed decision? That's an excellent question. I know that I think all the casino real estate developers who are submitting applications several of them have been offering webinars. Several of them have hired companies to do push polling and other activities to convince people that they have the best options. Probably they're all watching tonight, so you all might want to get together and do a webinar for yourself with another perspective, since I had, I don't know, close to 500 people or more watching this tonight, and some of them might be interested in your presentation. So I'm not discouraging anybody from doing public presentations or going to public presentations. So for the lobbyists for those companies, and they're all very large with large real estate backing, you know, go ahead. No, I have no problem with that. Okay, other questions? Where are the casinos anticipating their customers coming from? Because I believe that Les talked about that mostly it's locals. I think Lucy has done, I think she referenced some research that's been done about where people come from. I know that at least some of the folks I've talked to who are trying to get these casinos believe that they will draw in large numbers of tourists to their casinos who wouldn't otherwise be coming to New York City. I guess specifically for tonight to Manhattan. Does anybody have any research or knowledge of whether in fact people who aren't coming to Manhattan anyway for various reasons would suddenly decide Manhattan's where they want to come, or New York City's where they want to come?
There's several hundred casinos across the United States. You know, the only people going to these regional casinos are going to be local people. That's going to be the predominance of the constituency.
Those who love to gamble and who love to go to casinos, they wouldn't necessarily come to New York City. They would go to Las Vegas, which offers tons of casinos, and they can jump from one casino to another. And those who travel to New York City, they travel for all other reasons, including the museums that the New York City has, the Broadway shows, and all other attractions. That was similar to years ago, I did a testimony for New Hampshire legislatures, and they said that they will have casino next to the ski resort, and people would go to ski and then come down and sit in the casino and gamble. And my point was that those who love to ski cannot just sit still and gamble for hours. And that's the same thing for New York City tourists. The New York City tourists come to New York for whole other reasons, and that being museums, Broadway shows, and other activities.
I don't know that it's a fair question for Vicky. I guess it's a question for me too. What's our recourse if a casino opens and it's disastrous for our local community? I think you'll be giving a license for a specific length of time. What's the rules there?
It has to be for a minimum of 10 years, a maximum of 30 years, but it will be determined by the licensing board.
And are there any specifics within the license that if you cause A, B, C, D, you don't get to keep your license?
There are ways that a license could be revoked. I don't know exactly, I don't remember exactly what the list of reasons is. And of course, there could be litigation, as we discussed earlier, right? If it's causing harm to the community. But if it's a question of not delivering the revenues that were promised, that's not a matter.
So I've just been pointed out by my staff that we're actually at 8:30. I was so into this that I had no idea it was already 8:30. I was supposed to cut us off at 8:25 to thank you all profusely for your participation tonight, to thank everybody who participated through their questions. This is a long webinar, and there's still over 300 people on this Zoom alone without even looking at the Facebook numbers. So clearly, you all generated a lot of interest with your presentations and your answers. And I thank you very much for giving us your time and your evening. And again, everybody who's on, if you registered, you're going to get all these materials afterwards, plus a number of additional references have been thrown into chat. We'll make sure they all get to you as well when we send out and with the video. And I just so appreciate everybody participating tonight. And I want to thank all of my co-sponsor elected officials who may or may not be with us. I can't go check the boxes right now, but I know have staff watching also. This is all a process and we're still at the beginning of it. So I personally believe the more information all of us can get about realities and not realities, how we feel about this, what role we can play in this. There are many things that we all can be doing. And again, for my three guests who are here, I believe Tom in London probably went to bed. It's 3 a.m. or something. So I just want to thank you again so much for participating tonight. Take care.
Thank you for hosting.
Thank you.